So our next section, another thing that we do, we get a chance to talk to lots of different groups, most of whom are too busy in their day-to-day to be thinking about generative AI, but recognize that it's important in the legal field. So we wanted to share some questions that we get on the road and our answers to those. And one, I was presenting recently and felt a little bit badly that somebody raised their hand after an hour-long discussion about all these different topics. And I was talking about Claude this and Claude that. And they said, where do you actually access these things? Like, where is Claude? Where is ChatGPT? So where can we find them, Bridget?
Yeah. So this is interesting. I don't need you to tell me, like, don't tell me who the person was, but was it a legal audience? I'm just curious about who was asking. It was a legal audience. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was a legal audience, but and this will get into our next question. They're not a legal audience. So these are solo practitioners and small firms where there is not an IT team in-house thinking about these things or doing training on them. It tends to be people that are working really, really hard all day with the technology they have and haven't yet even thought about these things.
Yeah, so I think it's a totally fair question. It makes me think. It's a great question, and the answer is you can literally go to Google and put in Claude, and you will come up with the Claude website, and you will be able to use it for free or buy a subscription for. Mine comes in at like $21.79 a month now. I feel like there's like a little bit of tax or something. But it's $20 a month basically. Which I highly recommend. I think the subscription version is incredible, and really, really, really gives you the kind of introduction to the technology if you haven't played with it yet. But yeah, go right to your browser and type in Claude. You will absolutely find it. Same with ChatGPT. You can't you try to not find it. You will find it just by using your Google machine. I will tell you one of the things. I mean, this is a Gen AI moment, so I'm circling back, but it'll be really fast. I now use Claude and ChatGPT the way I used to use Google. Like, my habits have changed completely, and I start questions when I'm like trying to figure out something about like where I'm headed with putting something together for various tasks. I start now there and not in Google. But because you, dear audience member who needs to know where to find Claude, haven't done that yet, go to Google, put in Claude, and get your Claude account started and start playing with it.
And the other question during the same conversation was for solo practitioners and small firms. Large firms may have resources to be buying legal specific technology like Harvey, like CoCounsel. What would your advice be to small firms and solo practitioners who don't have those resources and they don't have technical expertise in house? Where do they get started?
One of the things that I think is really exciting about this moment is everybody is basically in the same place right now. So I think first of all, even if you are in a small firm or a solo practice, you will learn quickly how using the technology saves you time. I know you feel like you have no time because you have so much to do in a small firm when you're doing all of it yourself. You don't have a marketing department or a IS department. But you will quickly see how much time these tools save you. And then there are these resources that Jen and I have talked about, and we will continue to put in the show notes or post about, where you can learn pretty quickly, kind of updates week to week. I don't know. What do you tell people in small firms or solo practice who are looking to figure out how they can at least get competent?
Yeah, I mean, my first piece of advice is don't try to buy Harvey or CoCounsel. You're not going to be able to afford it, right? And B, I think the cost of all of these technologies will come down over time. So I think it's less important to learn the legal specific technologies and more important to develop just a muscle for understanding what they can do currently. And like you're saying, I mean, I just offer, examples of downloading the most recent Supreme Court case and opinion, something that's publicly available. There's nothing sensitive about it. Read it yourself as a lawyer, understand it as a lawyer would, and then upload it to one of these platforms and talk to it, ask it questions, ask it to summarize the opinion, see if you agree or disagree with the summary. I find increasingly they're pretty accurate, at least in summary. And then, if you have extra time, pretend you're preparing for an appellate argument about that case and ask the technology, to serve in the role of a judge who's challenging you on how this applies to your case. and you can change the personality of it. You can engage with it in lots of different ways and just play around with it that way. And then I think for the administrative side of your work and the non-sensitive pieces of your work, like marketing or, drafting an email to somebody that's not privileged or confidential, finding ways that you can adjust the tone to make it more diplomatic, to make it funnier. I mean, just playing around with it, I think at this stage is just as valuable a use of time, probably more than trying to figure out where it integrates in your legal practice right now.
I remember us talking about a small firm, maybe even a solo practitioner who had an appellate argument in a state appellate court who fed the publicly available documents, the briefs that were filed with the court, up into, I think it was just GPT, and had the LLM ask him questions as if it were the appellate court, and he answered the questions and had it write a decision, and it guided him in how he made his formal presentation, and he said it was an enormous help. And here's where it's still democratized, because you're right that the legal tools are still, there's some pricing issues, and I think that will change. But right now, Catherine Forrest, who's a partner at Paul Weiss, who's, a real, I think, leader in technology and generative AI, she does the same thing when she has an argument. So you can be a small practitioner, a solo practitioner in Pennsylvania doing an appellate argument before a state appellate court, or you can be Catherine Forrest preparing an argument for the Ninth Circuit, and you have access to the same tools. So I think starting to figure out the ways in which it can already help you is the first piece of advice.
Totally agree. And yes, that example you're recalling, I remember that lawyer saying that he can't, prove that ChatGPT helped him win oral argument, but he did win an oral argument. And he did say that it was much more helpful in terms of preparing him and thinking through some things that he wouldn't have thought through before, some new questions, that kind of thing.
One question I'm curious about, Jen, is whether you have any advice for solos or small firm lawyers about whether there are resources or communities where they could go for crowdsourcing information about this technology that might be especially useful for their practices. What kind of advice would you give to them if they were looking for that information?
Yeah, I think if I were a solo or small firm practitioner, I would start with my local bar association and see what conversations are happening and if there are any educational resources available. I know some are starting to have panel discussions with, some leading thinkers locally about how to use the technology. I'd also leverage social media. I actually think social media is a much better way to learn about this tech than, waiting for the next edition of whatever legal resource you consume, periodical type resource. Hop on LinkedIn and find some people in the legal tech community. Bob Ambrogi is a great resource to follow around legal tech. Nikki Shaver is another great resource, and I follow her. Are there people on LinkedIn and social media that you follow that might be helpful for anybody getting started?
We've mentioned Jordan before, but I think Jordan Furlong is, really worth a follow if you're thinking about the future of the legal profession and legal tech and legal education, frankly. I'm not sure it's especially helpful for small and solos, although I think a lot of what Jordan is thinking about and writing about is very hopeful for small firms and solo practitioners, given all the changes that are out there. So, I know everybody is short on time, but I would subscribe to Jordan's Substack and follow Jordan. And I've said this before as well, but I find that following people who are not necessarily in legal is quite useful with this technology, because it's surprising to me how much there is to learn from other disciplines that are maybe diving into use cases with the technology a little faster, and turns out they're not necessarily that different from us. So again, we say every week following Paul Reitzer and Mike Caput is worth doing. And I would always follow Ethan Mollick to sort of be learning what's happening with the technology.
Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.